Cool, brilliant. Whoa,
Okay.
fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for attending this KSA webinar. That it was originally Jason's idea, and he put it to me, and I was only too happy to join in. We're just going to try and keep to 1 hour today. It's more of a kind of informal Q&A type session, although there are a few there's a few slides, but we don't want to make it, like I say, too formal. There's just a few bits that are useful in terms of preparing for the KSA. So that's why I've just selected a few slides to share. But let us introduce ourselves. I'm Helen Moya, and my interest in KSA stems back from when I was the course director of the high intensity program at Nottingham University, which is a level 2 accredited course with the BABCP. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the different levels, that basically means that if you complete a level 2 BABCP accredited course, you come out with all of the minimum training standards that are required for becoming an accredited CBT practitioner with the BABCP. And the importance of that is that on those courses, then the KSA is required before you start. You can only enter the course if you meet the criteria, and we'll come on to talk a bit more about all of the criteria. But as we know, and if you're here for a KSA webinar, I'm sure you appreciate that the KSA pathway is in lieu of not having a core profession that's recognised in the list of core professions set by the BABCP. So as course director, I've obviously assessed quite a few KSAs and continue to provide support to people who are completing them, whether that's in preparation for a high intensity trainee position, or whether that's to become provisionally accredited if you don't have all of the minimum training standards when you leave your training course. So there are different pathways to becoming accredited. And I've always been very passionate about preparing people or helping people and encouraging people to get those KSAs ready so that you can just move on in your careers. So that's a little bit about me. So over to Jason and his motivation for doing this.
Yeah, so thanks, Helen. So I'm a bit more kind of new in all of this myself. I have been training at King's College on the high CBT course, which is also a level 2 over the last year. Teaching ended a few months ago, and my portfolio is submitted. So at this point, I'm just waiting to hopefully hear that I passed the exam board and being able to apply for provisional accreditation. I applied via the KSA route as a PWP. And so I know what the KSA is like from a very personal standpoint in terms of how overwhelming it can feel and how time consuming it can be and how easy it is to just want to avoid thinking about it or doing it. And I managed to luckily pass my KSA first time with no amendments needed. And since then, I have, on a more informal level, helped people with their KSAs by just kind of generally having a quick read through, giving them some bits of advice and so on. And what motivated me particularly with this is I think it's that time of the year again. It's quite topical at the moment, and of course there were the recent announcements in terms of the changes for people who are PWPs and register with the BABCP. Still a lot we don't know about that yet, but just good to kind of have a little recap, use the space to hopefully help some of you if you're about to start or have started your KSAs.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. So like we said, we don't know all the answers, And we're not even about giving answers. We're about generating questions and hopefully having discussions, and I'm motivating you to get on, because you have to remember that if you're in a position to be doing a KSA, that means that you do meet the criteria. So it is there, you've got it, it's putting it on paper. So that's what our intention is, to kind of, you know, motivate you and answer any questions we can. But of course, in an endeavor like this, it's absolutely idiosyncratic in terms of your own journey. And we have to say it isn't a black and white kind of task either. Even though there are some clear guidelines, there's also quite a bit of blurry lines, but we will try our best to, you know, sort of explain anything to you that is unclear or you would like a little bit more information on. Fantastic.
And just to kind of add, it's one of the difficulties is there isn't a strict formula to it, as you said, and that's because it's just such a personal document.
Absolutely. So I am going to just put up a few slides just to guide the discussion. But like I said, I don't want it to become like a lecture. But if Jason can, or if I can share my screen, let me see if I can do that.
Should have given you the permission.
Yeah. So just bear with me. I will share my screen. And at any point, let me just say, at any point, please, you know, put your microphone on or post a question in the chat, and we will endeavour to answer those. So like I say, we don't want it to be formal. Ask anything at any time. We posted this the announcement of this session on various social media sites, and I've got a couple of questions, 2 or 3 questions that we've collected, you know, from asking people what they would like to know. So we can come on to those in a little while. Right, so let me, can you see that? Is that shared now?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so I do a KSA building your portfolio webinar, you know, sporadically, and it's a longer version of this, and it's more, you know, sort of drills down further into certain issues. But I wanted to go through some of the background in terms of just trying to set the scene and motivate and give a few tips and tricks for getting started. Okay, so first of all, then, when you say KSA, it does normally evoke an emotional reaction, and that can vary, but it often is, you know, fear. I mean, you can write in the chat function any of your emotional reactions. It would be really great to get those, because you're the people, I presume, who are in the position at the moment who are ready to write their portfolios or in the process. So it really is one of those emotive kind of things where you say it and people tend to react. And we want to help you to overcome that emotional reaction and turn that into some action. So the first thing is to know your barriers. What is it? If you meet all the criteria, which we know you do, if you are in the position of writing presenting, writing, compiling a KSA, that does mean that you meet the requirements. So what are the barriers? So, you know, you be aware of your own personal ones, but there are some very common ones, and I'm going to make this relevant to CBT and applying a bit of that to this situation. And that is, it's often to do with uncertainty, not knowing exactly how to do it, or feeling the need for more information, reassurance. All of those safety and avoidance behaviours that are very typical when we worry excessively, all of those things can kick in, and they are part of what often causes these barriers to progressing. So just be sort of mindful of those things. And, you know, you don't even have to be a worrier or, you know, an excessive worrier for one thing to tip you into that zone. So, you know, it might be a need to do it right, to do it to a really good standard. And we know that that then creates a barrier to you actually getting started. And so reassurance is difficult with the KSA because everybody's experience is different, you know. So asking a group of other people who are doing their KSAs can be more anxiety provoking because they're going, well, I've done this, and you might not have even done that in your, you know, in your degrees, but it can still create a lot of anxiety. So be aware of that. And when we are thinking about worry, then, if we are taking that intolerance of uncertainty as a way of understanding some of the potential blocks, then within that model, we recognize there are two types of worry. There are problems and there are the what ifs. And actually, at the moment, possibly the problem is getting started. And that's something that you can control and you can actually overcome. The what ifs are infinite, and there may not be any answers to those, but they're the ones that are probably getting in the way of you making a start. And along that same theme then is to try and approach the task as we teach others who are experiencing difficulty with procrastination due to excessive worry, is to think about that threat opportunity continuum. So rather than seeing it as a black and white task that you either complete it or you don't do it at all, you know, try and make that thinking a bit more flexible. So at the moment, the likelihood is it feels like a threatening task. But if we turn that into a continuum, so threat is at one end and opportunity is at the other, we want you to try and start thinking about the opportunities that actually making a start and completing this KSA will afford you. So that's a little bit of, like I say, the motivational talk, hopefully. And do remember that this KSA is a document about your journey, and that's something to be celebrated. The thing that I love about CBT and CBT careers is that there are multiple pathways to becoming a CBT therapist, and those journeys are going to be rich and individual. And see the KSA as a celebration of your journey. And I'm going to pass you over to Jason to say a bit more about that, because you've obviously not long ago compiled this and had time to reflect on that.
Yeah. So I wholeheartedly agree with you about it being a journey. I think the KSA is something you might not appreciate until you've done it. But because before then it's just seemed as this really awful, difficult, momentous task. But I think it's a really great opportunity to reflect, which I think is a word that gets thrown around a lot without much substance. But it is a really reflective opportunity to actually really explore the journey you've had that has brought you to this point, and have that summarized quite nicely, I think, in a fairly thick package, but a summary nevertheless. And I found that was actually quite useful for interviews as well, because I've been able to spend a bit of time going over several years of all my experiences and been able to kind of consolidate that and bring that forward in my interviews when I'm answering through reflections as well. So I think it's something to be proud of when you've done it, and something to always keep as a reminder. So yeah, I think this is why I mentioned at the start about it being quite difficult in terms of it's being a personal journey, because it is a very personal document.
It is, and that does, as you say there, Jason, it does make it difficult to give sort of very black and white answers. But that is, in my opinion, the beauty of the KSA is that that is almost like a life story, isn't it? And you know, and if you see it like that, hopefully that will take a bit of the threat out of it, because you're not comparing yourself to other people. You are looking at your journey and mapping that out on the different criteria.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I guess I don't want to just keep on talking, you know, for many more minutes. So at this point in time, are there any comments or questions that people want to, you know, put on the floor already?
Just to say, there was a question in the chat which I've answered, but just for recording purposes, for those who will watch this later, the question was whether UEA is a level 2 course or level 1. UEA is level 2, and you can find that out just by typing in Google BABCP level 2 courses, and you'll see on their website a list of all their level 2 courses, and you can do the same for level 1.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you for that, Jason. Right, so if we move on, and this is the more sort of black and white bit in terms of a slide anyway. So, you know, what is the KSA all about? I mentioned briefly at the start that it is a document that is to evidence equivalence to a core profession that is recognised by the BABCP, and we'll come on to look at some of the more recent variants of, or not variants, but there is a set of core professions which, you know, sort of negate the need to do a KSA, but there are now a set of core professions which require a reduced KSA portfolio, and that is all related to meeting these minimum training standards. So again, going on the BABCP website, which I think in the last year or so has been updated, and it is a lot easier to navigate now, I believe. It wasn't always the case. But if you go to accreditation, the accreditation tab, it gives you a lot of information on there, and in quite, you know, you can download documents, but the minimum training standards is what this is related to. And as I said before, there are 2 routes that require the KSA. One is entering the level 2 accredited courses, which of course, if you go on a level 1 accredited course, that does mean you don't have to do the KSA necessarily at the start of the course. The course will be part of the minimum training standards that you'll be expected to evidence at the point at which you may decide to go for provisional accreditation. So what that means is then that if you're at a completely different point of coming out of a level 2 accredited course, that you've got years of experience that meet the minimum training standards, and that can be made up in lots of different ways. As long as you've met all of those standards, then a KSA will be submitted at the point at which you apply for your provisional accreditation. So that's just to make the distinction there. So know your guidelines. That the booklet here was produced in 2014. As far as I'm aware, this hasn't been updated. It is the standard, you know, guidelines for compiling your KSA portfolio. Now, as we mentioned, there have been a few updates recently, but that's not to the requirements of the KSA. It's who needs to do what and how much. So, you know, previously, if you hadn't got one of those core professions, you would have to complete the whole portfolio. It was very all or nothing. But now, it's been acknowledged that there are certain core professions that might not be fully, you know, mental health orientated, but that means that there are elements of that core professional training which count towards some of the knowledge, skills and attitudes that are presented in a full KSA. So it negates the need to do every single criteria. Again, if you're unsure about that, then go on the BABCP website and have a look at that list, because there are quite a few different scenarios and what that looks like. Do you want to say anything about that, Jason? Because in terms of PWPs and the registration element.
Because I'm not too familiar. I sadly missed this opportunity by a year. So I'm not too familiar with it entirely, I'm afraid. Did you have anything more specific in mind, Helen? Sorry.
Well, no, I know that a lot of people are unsure, or PWPs are unsure as, does this mean then that there are there any conditions which mean that I don't have to complete the whole portfolio?
My understanding is that you have to be a PWP, but you also need to have a psychology BSc degree, whether that's undergraduate or a master's conversion. So it isn't one without the other.
Yeah.
So that's probably good for those kind of people. But if you're a PWP who's come in from a very different background and don't have a psychology degree, then you won't be benefit from that, unfortunately. Because I think they're taking the whole thing into account, your theoretical knowledge from your undergrad alongside a more practical with the PWP. In terms of registering, I'm not too familiar with the process. I initially thought it'd be as easy as just signing up and sending a few documents, but I believe you need some things from your service as well. I'm afraid the website would likely be indicates what you would need.
Yeah, but I think it is to do with your personal experience, the pathway that you took in terms of the PWP training, your routine and how long you have been qualified as well, and whether you're registered or not. So, but in terms of other professions, because I come from a nursing background, but my nursing background was in learning disability nursing. So that is actually still recognised as a core profession. So I didn't have to do a KSA when I did it wasn't a level 2 accredited course when I completed it. It became one the year later. So I was in this weird situation where even if you had a core profession, you had to do something like a KSA, which was a mapping document to actually map out which learning outcomes you covered in your core profession. So it is going to be a little bit messy, I guess, but you will know your particular background and make sure you ask the BABCP, because they are really forthcoming and the accreditation team are really great, but obviously they are stretched as well, so sometimes you might have to wait for replies, but they're normally really, really helpful.
I'm sorry to intrude there, Helen. I thought, just going back to the earlier question about the registration process, I'm not sure if it's worth just quickly highlighting key things you need to register.
Yeah, go on.
So you need to have worked within a specified system of care, such as IACT, for 6 months, which includes training as well. You need to be accountable to a professional practice and a senior member of the service. So assuming you're working in IACT, that's not a problem. Of course, adhere to their standards of conduct, but you must also be providing a minimum of 2 hours per week step 2 practice as part of your clinical work. So if you were once a PWP and you've got that training and you've left it and you're now doing something entirely different that hasn't got clinical work, step 2 work, then you aren't eligible to register. And it is explicitly stated in step 2 practice.
Right. Oh, thank you for that. That's nice and clear. And that's the thing with all of these guidelines, they, different people have different experiences and backgrounds, and it's really important that you're very clear on, what applies to you. Right. So.
Oh, we've got someone has raised their hand.
Yeah, brilliant.
Sarah, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jason. It was just to clarify that last point you just raised about the step 2,
Yes.
because I'm coming from I'm not a PWP, but I've worked in secondary. I'm working in secondary care at the moment, and my background is in probation, and I have a BSc, so I've been accepted onto the course, but I don't think I'll have that step 2. So would I need to gain that whilst in the service, the IAPS service that I'm in?
So this was more specific. Is this specifically for
That's
the
more
BABCP
specifically for the
registration?
PWP registration pathway, Sarah. So
okay, all right, that makes sense.
Yeah,
you
so
will be looking at the requirements for your background, the probation side of things.
So just to clarify, with the PWP, why I mentioned it is because the BABCP brought in a change recently where if you meet certain criteria and register with them, which has its own set of criteria, you don't have to do the full set of the KSA. It's a condensed version, I believe. Only 3.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I thought that applied to everybody. I just had a little bit of a panic. Thank you.
Sorry, that was about the PWP route, Sarah. But you know, if you've got a specific background like probation, then there will be a condensed version for you, won't there?
There isn't, unfortunately, because
I
know because they in October 2020, so last October they took probation off as a core profession. So I was a bit late to the mark of applying, but it's not condensed. But I think it kind of I don't know if I can chip in with my other question that I've put in the chat, because it might. Thank you. It's just to wonder if there's any time limit on the evidence that you're submitting, because my probation training was about 18 years ago. So some of the modules that I did in the MVQ would cover things like risk assessing and safeguarding, but they're from like early 2000s. Would that matter? Or
well, not in terms of the knowledge basically and the skills you've got, haven't you? I guess if you've got a recent example, if you're doing like a countersigned self-statement where you're giving a recent example of where you might have put that into practice, then wherever that knowledge came from, then clearly that is always going to be valued. Some people come to CBT, for example, as a second profession or a career change many years later, and that was similar to myself. So I'd got the learning disability nursing as my core profession, but I hadn't actually worked as a learning disability nurse for more than 10 years or probably 15 years before I did the training. So no, that is still valid, but I guess you just have to think about what you're using as those examples.
Like how I've applied it more recently.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
No problem. Zane, what's your question?
Hello everyone.
Hi.
So I've just recently qualified as a PWP, and I'm from a non-psychology background, so I understand I have to do the full KSA. So I'm just wondering, over the next 2 years, what kind of additional short courses can I do to just make my profile look very strong when I apply, aside from like long-term health conditions and supervision, like counselling, even a PG cert, anything that will just put me on par with that's my question.
It's there's a lot of answers to that one. I mean, I think there are a lot of opportunities there, lots of different, if you're talking about the core psychology element, there's all sorts of things, but just I would say that clearly you must have a lot of experience already and a lot of knowledge and qualifications. So it wouldn't be a case, in my opinion, it wouldn't be a case of having to do a full degree.
Oh, okay.
Don't feel you have to do that, because you can gain, like you say, that psychology knowledge or evidence, a level of psychology knowledge that won't be at a level of degree. Would you say, Jason?
Yes, I was going to say, in terms of kind of specific things you have to do, I didn't do anything specific in preparation for the KSA. I found that the PWP training will equip you, and the 2 years experience following that will equip you with the basics for it. You just might need a couple bits of extras to supplement, particularly with KSA 4, the models of therapy. In terms of, and I guess that goes more, me really a question back to you, Helen, because I know Kings have a view in terms of how the long-term conditions training can complement the models of therapy section. And kind of your understanding of that would be good to hear, because I know each course has a different kind of view on the KSA. Kings have made it clear that they will value some things over other things compared to other courses.
That was never our view. Like I say, I think that as long as what you're learning is meaningful and it actually meets the criteria, then that's the important thing. That there's no point doing just something piecemeal to tick a box. I've never been into that. So, if it meets the criteria, then, that's the important element, and that you can show that it's meaningful. And by that, I mean that you have applied that knowledge in practice. So if it's just a tick box exercise and you've not really done anything with it, I personally, as a course director or ex-course director, wouldn't see that as being as valuable as, doing something that you've actually applied. So if it was the long-term conditions training, for example, and you are actively using that and you've demonstrated really, good learning outcomes from it, then, we never had sort of like an under table checklist that was over and above the general guidelines.
And just to say as well, there are a number of ways beyond even just doing courses to get the evidence you need. And KSA will mention things like being able to read books and there's a template specific for that. In terms of specific courses, that was a question I had at the time, and now I realize there isn't really a specific course or training you can do. There's a number of different options out there.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
It's a difficult question because there's not really one single answer.
Well, no, it's not a difficult question. That is the answer. There isn't an answer, and that is you can be creative with it as long as you demonstrate the understanding or whatever that criteria requires you to demonstrate, as long as you can do that.
Got another hand up.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. No, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Danny, what would you want to ask?
Hi, I'm a bit of an unusual candidate, as basically I did my PWP training in September 2019. I unfortunately failed by 1 mark on the recording and found out when I had started my new service, going in as a potential qualified PWP. They I'm obviously really grateful for them, as they kept me on, and were, because it was like an open plan office, they could obviously hear and my practice, and they kind of disagreed with the failure. They wanted to keep me on and basically paid for me to redo my PWP training. Obviously COVID happened, so it delayed me enrolling onto a new university. Obviously the same university wasn't able to make me redo it there. So long story short, on paper I'm qualified just from July this year, but obviously I've actually been practicing the same way as a qualified PWP has since October 2019. So I don't know whether I have a shot at still doing the KSA for like the next cohort, or whether I actually need to wait for those 2 years on paper.
I think you probably, I know you perhaps won't want to hear this. I would say probably it will be, it's the date at which you acquire the award. So that does mean the 2 years from July. But go on, Jason.
I was going to say, sorry, just because it's definitely about kind of qualifying and having that certificate to hand. But I'm not sure, Helen, do disagree with me, but is there also the discussion around the funding as well? Around wanting, you know, naturally wanting to safeguard that and have people do an NHS funded course using that for 2 years before then going. Is that at all part of the reason why there's 2 years?
Well, there's a historical answer to that. I don't want to take up too much time, but when IAPT was introduced, if you think about the 5-year forward plan, that is our policy driver for developing a workforce that can meet the aims and objectives of IAPT, the IAPT program. And we're not there yet. We haven't got the workforce that is equipped to, you know, meet all of that. But when you think about 2008, 2009, there was a shortage of core professionals who would access those programs. So they did create a little bit of a fast track early on, and that's now slowed down, and they've recognized that actually it's a good idea to let people grow into a role and develop the role. And it's my personal opinion that the PWP role is way more career focused than the high intensity CBT role. In fact, a lot of people want to jump into high intensity training and don't realize that once you've done that, if you stay in IAPT at the moment, there are limits to your career development. And actually the PWP role has progressed exponentially. So all I would say is take those 2 years to get whatever you can out of the role, because once you get into the high intensity role, it's either, you know, sort of going through the management sort of ladder. At the moment, I'm hopeful that that might change. But, you know, so there's a historical and a political reason for why the pathways have kind of changed over time. But I'm aware that, you know, time-wise, I want people to get their questions in. So do you, Zane, do you want to quickly jump in with it? Is it a quick question?
No, apologies. I think my hand was up from before.
Oh, right.
Apologies. I'll put it back down.
Okay, no problem, no problem. I'm just going to put a few more slides up, and then we're going to leave the remainder of the time open for people to ask further questions, and also, like I say, for us to address these other questions that we've got from the social media posts. So, oops, there we go. Right, I have a really big thing about reading as being you know, an educationalist by background. That one of the things that is really, really important, and it sounds really basic, but we often forget it when we're so keyed up, ready to get a piece of work done, we jump straight in without doing the background reading, because we have an idea of what we want to say and we might jump straight in. And that's not actually a bad strategy. Getting something on paper, you know, can be a first draft, and you can, you know, edit it. But what I would say is it's really, really important to just do a little bit of reading, reconnect with the knowledge that you already have, connect with new knowledge, you know, areas that you're particularly interested in that are going to sustain your interest. Do a bit of reading, take some notes, and develop your ideas, or really be clear on what your ideas are before you write those personal statements, because you're going to have to look competent in those statements, that I know this and I'm going to show you how I know it. But not only that, it's about, you know, what you believe, or what your opinion is, and what your position is on that knowledge. So see it as, yeah, it is challenging, but see it as a challenge in a really good way, and make it a critical piece of work that you can show.
And I want to just add on as well, the KSA, I think we often approach it as this huge thing and we don't know where to start. They're broken down into numbers, and really just look at those numbers individually and really try to understand what is the criterion for 1, 2, 3, and so on. What is it they're looking for? What is it they're asking for? It is outlined in the KSA. It's just really taking the time to read it and understand it before you go straight into delving into the answers. That's a mistake I've seen from many people, who then come and say, I don't really know what this is asking from me. And my response is, have you read what it's asking? Because it does outline it quite clearly, or in my opinion, it does.
Yes, well, you know, and the reading is about understanding what's required, but also on that topic. So if it's been a while, so let's say it's psychopathology, you've got a position on it, but it's a bit cloudy, you haven't really thought about the subject for a long time, do a bit of reading, sharpen your ideas up, you know, talk to a colleague, talk about it, and then you can sort of generate and you can reconnect with your own position. Once that's there in the forefront of your mind, you're more likely to be able to do a good draft. Does that make sense? I'm going to see some, a virtual, yeah. Okay. Also, like I say, tips for writing, you know, of course, you're all competent people. You meet the criteria, as I've said over and over again, but treat these individual sections, criteria, those personal statements, a little bit like an essay. You are making an argument, you're having an active voice. The KSAs that I've read, which have sort of like had a weaker feel to them, are those ones where people are almost apologizing or not really using the active voice to demonstrate their understanding. Does that make sense? It's more like, oh, well, I did this, I did that, or it's a bit of a list and it's not really showing, you know, what you do know. And also the clinical relevance is really important, because for each of those criteria, you are expected to give 2 illustrative examples of how you have put that knowledge, skill, or attitude into practice. Okay. I'm not going to go into specific criteria or give any tips or advice on them. The reason I've highlighted these 2, which are criteria 3 and 4. This is criteria 3 in the knowledge section, psychopathology and diagnostic skills. Well, I am giving a little bit of a tip, and that is, you know, think about it before you write, because most people will go straight into the diagnostic skills. They don't think about what is psychopathology, what does it mean? And there are more than one answer to that, you know, and give it some thought. It's one of my pet subjects. I love it. And, you know, see it as not a challenge, but as something, you know, sort of to evoke some reaction and some exploration, and put that in your personal statement. So like I say, I'm not giving you any tips or tricks as such, but just remember that there's more than one way of making sense of people's emotional distress. And that's what this is about. How do we understand when somebody's sat in front of us demonstrating that they're in distress? How do we make sense of that? And that's what psychopathology is asking you. And there is definitely more than one way of answering it. And some of the traps are that people only think of the medical model, or, you know, if you are in an IAP service, you think about, and that's fine, it is a model, but, you know, there are lots of others. Okay, and the models of therapy is probably one of the biggest sections to complete, because the criteria, I'm not going to go through all of this, but if you do watch the video later, you can pause it and read this, or you can go on one of the social media sites, which we'll mention at the end of this session, where guidelines, etc., can be accessed, or because this is taken from the Sheffield University, you know, course guidelines, you can Google that as well. I've put this up because I particularly like how Sheffield University have kind of broken down criteria 4 to make it very explicit of what's required. I think this goes over and above what the BABCP do, and I wouldn't think of paraphrasing this because I think it's really clear. So those 2 sections are probably the most sort of tricky to do well. or to, you know, pass first time, but that doesn't mean say you're not going to. It's just being aware that those two tend to be the ones that are picked up, if any. So like I say, in line with wanting to give you opportunity to ask questions, I am going to kind of move on and round up some of these slides. And I guess, you know, what we hope you'll do after attending this or watching it, the recording, is start thinking about how you can approach the task. Because it is, like we said at the start, about breaking down barriers and having a plan. There's no right or wrong. It's not black and white. Give it a go, you know, have a stab or whatever strategy. There's obviously more than one way of doing it. So what challenges, really write down, what are my hurdles, what are getting in the way, and how can I overcome them? Use your problem solving skills, you know, set something in your diary, whatever it takes, just come up with a rudimentary plan and give it a go, you know, because that's going to take you one step forward to either getting on a course or getting even called for interview, because we know that you really should have that KSA completed before you apply for the high intensity training positions if it's a level 2 accredited course. And if it's provisional, you just want to get this out of the way and you want to get on with life, you know. So go away with a bit of an action plan today. That will be really positive. In terms of support, there are different social media groups. The groups that I'm involved in are mainly this one, the CBT Careers group, which is very broad and open, and that's open to anybody who's interested in CBT or from even, you know, before doing a psychology degree. I want to enable people to see the different pathways and support each other in trying to find the best, you know, not to do courses that aren't necessary, for example. So CBT Careers is a Facebook group. This KSA portfolio support is actually a private Facebook group attached to a webinar that I do sporadic. Is £25 and it's longer than this one, and it drills down a bit deeper into some of the you know, the criteria, but that portfolio support group is you can pay to enter it because it has the webinar recorded on there, and people can ask questions and support each other, so it's got the peer support element to it. And then part of my own personal private practice, because I only work 2 days a week private, the rest is in IAPT. KSA is one of my areas that I specialize in, because I used to get very frustrated that we'd see fantastic candidates coming for, you know, high intensity training, and if they hadn't got the KSA, it was, sorry, we cannot offer you a place. And it used to frustrate the hell out of me, because I could see really good quality people in front who had just not got round to doing it. So that's one of my motivations, really, for encouraging people to get it done. And so, yeah, that's the group. So let's fast forward to Q&A. I know we've only got a little bit of time, but, you know, we've still got a few minutes. Has anybody got any questions you would like to ask?
Sorry, I don't know how to put my hand up. I'm not very familiar.
That's okay.
For the models of therapy, I've got, I can get references. So for pharmacological, I can get a GP that I've sat with and shadowed. He's happy to give me a reference counsellor. But I'm just wondering, how many can I, for that criteria, could I have a reference for pharmacological and then a reference for counselling, and then I've got a intro online introduction to CBT course and my PWP, would that be acceptable?
You would only need one counter signature. So honestly, that is all that's necessary. So I hear what you're saying, because in some respects, that's 4 different approaches. And I hear what you're saying. But in terms of demonstrating your knowledge, you'll be doing that in the criteria and hopefully through your illustrative examples. But if it's a countersigned one, then you only need one person to do that. Any of those people, really.
It's just because I've got them, I thought I'm go big or go home really with that.
But for each criteria, you only need one signatory. That's all I'm saying. You can keep them and see if there's any of the other countersigned statements that they might be able to, you know, provide, or there may be a reference for, because you remember you only need actual references for criteria 11, 12 and 13. The counter signatory is them reading your statement and agreeing with it and the validity of what you've written. So, you know, and the BABCP only require 1 per criteria.
Okay. Also, how many do you have to have 3 separate people for references, or could you have?
Right. Well, with references, what the BABCP state is, you need more than 1 for the, you know, for all of you, for all of those statements. If you are doing the statements, because not everybody needs to do a countersigned statement, we should say. But for those 3 that you do need actual references for, it can't be the same person doing all 3. But you could get one person doing 2 of the 3, but you know, so you don't need 3, but you need more than 1.
Yeah.
So 2 or 3 is the answer to that one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's just I'm struggling with like the evidence for like I've been a PWP for since time began, 12 years, and I've like not kept my certificates, you know, for like my risk training and all that sort of stuff, because my I was happy being a PWP, and then I was like, well, actually, my little boy's gone to school. Now it's time to focus on my career. So that's why I was thinking about the references, just to evidence things more.
Well, remember, you can do the self-reflective pieces as well. So in your statement, you'll be saying what you did on your training, but more recently, you may do some self-directed study, and then you use one of those, I think it's a number 5 piece of paper, which actually allows you to use that as an appendix for each criteria. So if you're evidencing self-directed study, then you can add that to the evidence for that criteria. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, you know, I was doing some psychodynamic training on read. It was only 6 hours. Would that be enough for the models of theory?
No, it's 3 days worth. Yeah. So so that wouldn't be by itself, no. But if you could tag that in with other training that makes up equivalent to 3 days, and be creative with it, because remembering back to, you know, maybe courses or degrees that you've done in the past, there may have been a, you know, somebody in your team who might have done some training, you know, who has come from a psychodynamic background, and you've attended something, you know, there's multiple ways of achieving the different criteria.
Just evidencing it though, that's where I'm.
But
so just to highlight to you,
study. Yeah.
Just to highlight to you that the 3 days, it can be accumulated. So it doesn't have to be one training that is 3 days itself.
Exactly.
So it could be that if you want to go through more training courses on read, finding a few more that equate to about 3 days.
Yeah.
Alternative, that is what I did. I did for my humanistic section was go on to reads, and I actually found a 70-hour one.
70 or 17?
70.
Right.
I wouldn't be able to tell you where it is now. It's been too long, and I got it on sale. And when I looked after it, it did actually go back to £300. So they weren't just fibbing like some do. But that was the one I did for that. Yeah, that was it. And then I know with some of my friends, they did the self-directed study to complement other parts.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions anybody's got? Anything in the chat, Jason?
No, can't see anything in the chat. Did you get any questions emailed over, did you say?
I did. I'm just let's have a look at those, see if we've covered them. One was about the training courses for the models of therapy, which I knew was one of those.
I know you just to highlight, there's the Reed's website courses, but I remember you mentioned to me Shirley Reynolds.
Yeah, Shirley Reynolds is a great, yeah. So if you Google Shirley Reynolds, she's got a fantastic website with all sorts of, it is mainly CBT related, but it's got stuff for kids and adults on there. And Shirley and I have been talking about trying to, find good quality courses that could be added onto that website, which could target this models of therapy going beyond CBT. So it's on our radar. It has been online
you
for a long
you can
time.
develop one.
Yes,
yourself.
well, if I find the time. And somebody, and again, one of these questions again has already been answered. How many references from one person? And the other one has been answered, because I know that who put this on down has actually asked the question. So I think then that we have come to the end. So thank you everybody for your attention. Like I say, if you've got any last minute comments or questions, do fire away.
And I just want to add, with models of therapy, be creative, try understand a model, understand how you might have applied that in any form of way. It all counts. So for example, humanistic, that's a difficult one as a PWP where you do a lot of CBT, but are you using any core elements from humanistic? Because humanistic is such a massive model within all therapy, right? That it kind of, I find that with humanistic, it kind of has drifted into all aspects of core therapy to some degree. And for me, it was really about almost grasping at straws to really think about where have I used some of these before in my practice in any way.
And also don't forget you other, like say, team members. If you've got somebody in your team who is humanistic trained or psychodynamic, spend time with them, even go through a case, with them. How would you treat this? Okay, that might not count as, sort of training hours, but they may be able to advise you on good quality training, courses. They're going to be more expert in directing you to good quality online training, for example, or even, like I say, just getting a clearer understanding from asking questions to other practitioners who are experienced in that modality.
And just to say, final point, I'm not familiar with all the courses that do this, but if you are attending King's or Royal Holloway, you will automatically be offered a free 3-day training event on psychodynamic, humanistic, and systemic, which will give you a day certificate which they accept for KSA evidence. I'm not sure, Helen, there are other courses that do that, but I'm not sure who else.
I don't know. I think there's so many variations, but that sounds like a nice thing to do, a nice thing to offer.
So, and someone said something, sorry.
I was wondering if UEA do that.
UEA, yeah.
They do that.
I don't know. I only know King's and Royal Holloway, I'm afraid.
But remember, the likelihood is you've got knowledge, it's just honing it. And like you say, it's demonstrating where that's come from. So it's not all going to be found in one online course.
Yeah.
If you charge like 200 quid to just do that, yeah, that I think we'd have loads of people doing it.
Well, I know, and that isn't how, it isn't what I value, but anyway, that's another issue. Like I say, thank you everybody for coming. Do join the groups, you know, the open groups, ask questions, network, and that's how we support each other, isn't it? But you know,
to find a recording of this, it will, I mean, I'm sure Helen will share the link. I'm going to upload it onto YouTube, UK Clinical Psychology. There's a few videos there already, a few doctorate related stuff. I and my friend Ella did 2 on the high CBT, far longer than this, about 2.5 hours, if you remember, Helen. Yeah, remember. Helen did join. If you look at the first one, about an hour in, we actually do again go through the KSA. Helen contributed quite a lot to that as well. So check all of that out.
Great. So yeah, and if you've got any questions, like I say, you can contact us via these various groups that we've probably, you know, overlapped in. So like I say, have a good evening, and thank you for attending, and you know, see you later. Cheers then. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. We've got one person. Oh, there. Okay, everyone's gone. I'm going to stop recording.